Thank you. So today, as the title of my talk suggests, I'd like to speak to you about weather forecasts and warnings and how the public's interpretation and understanding of them may vary across different media channels. In exploring both how forecasts and warnings are made and then subsequently presented via various mediums, I hope to highlight the sometimes hidden and other times absent role of regional, historical and tacit knowledge in these systems. Today, meteorological forecasting is dominated by satellite technologies and numerical models operating on a national, hemispheric and often global scale, whilst at the same time, many ways for end users to access weather information from dedicated cable television to mobile phone applications are becoming more and more personal. More broadly, the case studies I'm going to speak about will hopefully highlight the role of meteorological experts in not only creating forecasts and warnings, but also their role in how these detailed and complex predictions are then communicated and ultimately interpreted by the public. I hope to show the difficulties created by obscuring the limitations and uncertainty inherent in weather forecasts from the public, especially when the customer believes the service is tailored to them personally. In addition, I also hope to introduce some of the historical and contingent reasons why many probabilistic features of forecasts and warnings were put into a black box, and hopefully generate discussion on how in this instance we can follow Latour's efforts and open Pandora's black box, and thus engage with scientists about the potential role regional, historical and tacit knowledge can play in forecast models and warning systems. Before I go any further, I just want to say this is the first outing of this research really, and it's very much a work in progress, so any feedback, discussion, especially suggestions where there might be connections with secondary literature are greatly appreciated. So whilst researching the development of public weather services in the UK, especially those for extreme weather events such as floods and cold periods, I've come across a multitude of examples of both overstatement of forecast accuracy by meteorologists and misunderstandings of forecasts by end users. And although in the decades since the Second World War these errors and miscommunications appear across all forecast channels, print, radio and television, is the most recent channel of dissemination, the internet, which has recently become of interest to me. Unlike the communication of forecasts and warnings via older media channels, the internet appears to present a forecasting and warning service that is specifically tailored and personalised to you, the end user. Further, much like recent discussions, both in academia and the press about GPS and satellite navigation systems, internet weather services also place you, the individual, at the centre of these tailored outputs. This is a recent article from the BBC website about the changing role, sat-nav and the changing relationship with maps in everyday life. But does such a narrative which gives such a transformative position to the internet truly reflect the historical evidence? Haven't maps and the technologies for communicating weather warnings always been specifically orientated towards their end users? Or has the explosion of these services on the internet, with their individual personal nature and their visual and graphic capabilities, truly altered the way the public understand digital weather forecasts and warnings, and perhaps in turn altered their relationship with the actual weather and the environment in which they live? Before I proceed any further, in case any of you don't use the internet or aren't familiar with these services, I'll just introduce a few of the ones and some of the main ones that are used in the UK. I'll just quickly run through these. So this is the Met Office's main weather portal. That's the National Weather Service in the UK. Key features that feature on most of these, at the top you'll notice there's a yellow warning of severe weather there. So any weather warnings are right at the top of the page. You can click through, see more details, whether they're for your region and things like that. We have a search function, and you can enter a place name or postal code, and then it will give you the region. I've highlighted there, I've put my suburb of Manchester there, and then it gives you your outlook for that area. Similarly then, we have the BBC site. To note here, all of the output, weather output nationally of the BBC is provided by the Met Office. So the data coming in is the same. Actually, if you track these day by day, the forecast looks slightly different, which is sometimes quite interesting considering it's the same meteorologist compiling all of this. It's a bit of a simplified interface compared to the Met Office site. There's less ability to look at things like rainfall data and to click through to find more detail. And then finally, just to show some sort of difference and maybe a more detailed weather service, this is weathersparks.com. It's a lot more, again you can search by place, fairly standard, a lot more detailed. In the top right you can actually choose different forecast services. If you've got the free one like this is, you can choose between the World Met Office, the Norwegian service and the US service. If you have the premium one, I think you can actually choose from several other forecast services as well. It not only tells you the future forecast, it also tells you the actual observed weather, so this line down the middle here, which is a feature not present on the Met Office main portal or the BBC portal, which are the two most popular websites in the UK for weather. So that's quite an interesting one, because I think some days you can go on and see the actual observed from the hour before is quite different than the forecasted. And also you have this map, which I think is quite important for users and is missing from most other services, where it shows you the closest weather station. So it shows you where these actual observed readings are coming from. So you can see on here, I've typed in again Gatley, and you can see I'm quite close to that 22, which is the nearest weather station. But you could see that you could be, in Sheffield, and there might not be one for quite some distance. The diversity of these services and their varying detail shows how the internet enables the communication of weather information at different levels of complexity for different end users. Some services take this even further, providing specific niche information only of interest to a small user group. For example, magicseaweed.com provides detailed information on sea conditions, including temperature, wind and swell, and this is all specifically aimed at surfers. Despite this variety, all of these services present a black box of a forecast with very limited or no mention of uncertainty or probability, and no details of how the forecast itself was made. I tell the machine where I want information for, and it tailors it to me. It seems on these online interfaces there is little space, scope, or importantly, public demand for occluded fronts, visualization of continental weather systems, or interpretation of forecast models by a regionally experienced meteorologist. These systems have much less scope for explanation of the forecast than television or radio, and provide no space for a two-way dialogue, which has previously been a feature of weather services in the UK, such as those offered by a telephone and high street weather centres. The inability of internet weather services to offer a meteorologist's interpretation, explanation and regional aspect on a forecast or warning presents some interesting problems for their successful communication to the public. So back in November of last year, when I'd submitted the abstracts for today, and I was kind of thinking about which direction I was going to take these thoughts and ideas and this research in, I noticed one of these occasions where the internet sort of system's not quite settled down. On the 26th of November, England had a very wet summer, quite a wet autumn. This was the picture presented by the Environment Agency's Flood Warning Service on the 26th of November. The Environment Agency Service is run in partnership with the Met Office site that we were just on. It seems that England was not only sinking underwater, but it was also sinking under the weight of 475 flood warnings. Surely this must be the worst flooding the country had ever experienced. Well, it wasn't. Meteorologically and hydrographically, it was far from it. From 1945 onwards, the number of flood warnings issued by government agencies in the UK has continued to increase decade on decade, yet there has been no discernible matching increase in periods of extreme weather. Anyway, whilst I was looking at this map, I noticed that in my region, in the northwest of England, there was only one red warning, and a red warning means flooding is expected, immediate action required. And then I looked at where this red warning was, and I noticed that it was for a region right behind my house. So took a greater interest in it then. So being a good environmental historian, the following week I attached a camera to my bike and went to explore the stretch of road that this red warning had been issued for. And so I've got a short video. It's a little bit shaky, I apologise for that. It wasn't very well paved and it was on my bike. But I'll just talk through some of the features and why this warning was so interesting to me. There we go. So the first thing you'll notice is the name. This is Ford Lane. For those of you who don't, English might not be your first language, a ford is a point that can be crossed on a river, a shallow point of a river. And we can see here there's some houses on the right, and then over this wall on the left there's a steep drop, and then there's playing fields and a river, the River Mersey in fact. So beyond the name Ford Lane, the reason why this flood warning caught my attention was because the stretch of the river that Ford Lane runs across is part of the Upper River Mersey catchment, which is often held up as a successful example of mixed-use floodplain management, where physical adaptations to the river channel, such as straightening, have been combined with a policy of restricting floodplain development to land uses that can temporarily be flooded. Indeed, along a large portion of Ford Lane are 2 golf courses that in time of excess are flooded to alleviate the flood risk to the residential areas. That's about the only bit of water, flood water you'll see as we go along, so it wasn't too bad. As you'll see as well, Ford Lane was once a continuous stretch of road, and when they changed the river channel, it's now only accessible to pedestrians along the whole way and is split into 2 roads for cars. So this is a pedestrian area now and a kind of nature park by the river. And you'll see as we come along here, now you'll see the river in a second. We come up here, and this is the River Mersey, and hopefully if the camera stays still enough, you'll be able to see that it's highly modified. There's man-made levees on either side. The course of it's been straightened, and then this footbridge goes over the River Mersey. And so, whilst I was cycling along this stretch of road, I began to think about the greater role that regional and tacit knowledge could play in online flood warnings and forecasts. Residents on Ford Lane or users of the golf courses would be familiar with a pattern of regular flooding along the lane. But would the wider public logging onto the Environment Agency website appreciate that this warning was for a very specific and vulnerable location? Or would they just notice that there were red alert flood warnings in their area? How many of the other 190 red warnings issued that day could similarly benefit from a local nuance? And so we will just see shortly, this building here is the clubhouse for the golf course, and then as we come round in a second, you will see the main bit where the warning is actually issued for, and the bit that regularly floods, where the river runs exactly alongside the road and the river run side by side. And the other thing to note is this part of the road only goes to the golf courses, which are flooded themselves to alleviate the pressure on the residential area. So the road is closed because the golf courses are closed when the flooding occurs. You'll see that in a second. I'll just leave it running in the background where the river appears by that. During previous research, I'd seen how insurance companies producing flood risk maps incorporate historical and local knowledge when producing flood risk zones. But as for the development of internet forecasts and warnings and their inclusion of such local aspects, I had no experience. Of course, there is no archival evidence yet as to how these services were created, and perhaps unsurprisingly, the Met Office and other private companies who I approached weren't willing to share this information with me. It was when trying to overcome this seeming dead end that I realized that although the technological capabilities of communicating weather via the internet may be unique, their development and their use of a personalized service delivered in a deterministic format were part of a much larger historiography of the development of public weather services in the UK. So just quickly now, I'll pause him. So quickly, since the 1950s, the number of public weather services being provided by the Met Office in the UK has grown substantially. Early public weather services at the Met Office were largely unplanned and often developed in response to trigger events such as the national scale flood warning system that was created in 1954 after the devastation of the 1953 North Sea floods. By the mid-1950s, under the direction of a new director, the Met Office set forth a vision for weather services for every citizen of the UK. In 1954, weather forecasts on British TV were changed, the format was developed, and they had qualified meteorologists, so Met Office meteorologists, which is still a feature to today, that there's a Met Office qualified meteorologist. And then after the creation of a specific public weather services department in 1955, there came a myriad of new developments, a telephone forecasting service, regional radio broadcasts, and then the separation of specialized services from those for the general public. So the shipping forecast, for example, was separated from the general forecast on the radio. By the early 1960s, a very new customer-driven aspect to weather services in the UK had emerged. It was perhaps typified most neatly by the opening of high street weather centres in cities around the UK. These high street spaces included a forecast broadcasting space, a room for interviews with inquirers from businesses, a general inquiries information desk for the public, and large window displays containing forecast maps and weather information. So this is the first of these centres, which is in London. They were hugely popular. By the 1980s, there were 13 of these centres on high streets across the UK. I like to think of them as the sort of internet version of their day. In developing all these services, the Met Office really expounded these centres and all these other services as places where both regional businesses and the public could get advice that went beyond routine forecasts, and where knowledge of local microclimates and regional businesses' needs could play an important role. The Met Office viewed the development of these centres not as in conflict with the increasing automation of weather services, but rather as an extension of this trend. I'm just going to skip a little bit here. Yeah, so throughout this process, the Met Office made a lot of decisions on how to communicate and visually present forecasts and warnings. They made the decision to have meteorologists presenting on television. They made the decision to have inquiry desks that any member of the public could go to. And they made decisions about how much probabilistic language to use, how much technical language to use, often erring toward the side of what would the housewife understand was a lot of the conversation in these discussions. And so if we consider the development of public weather services in the UK from the 1950s onwards as a whole, we can see several continued trends of which the development of internet services are clearly part. There's been an almost obsessive drive to produce forecasts that are more specifically tailored to the end user, from the launch of regional forecasts on TV and radio and the face-to-face services of the high street, to the postal code search function of today. The more personal a forecast is perceived to be, the more utility the end user takes from it, and therefore the more demand there is for the service. Accompanying this shift, there has been a drive to present forecasts and warnings at differing levels of complexity, depending on who the intended end user is, from the complex marine details provided in the shipping forecast to the 30-word weather outlooks in the national newspapers. The internet, combined with the wealth of environmental data now available via satellite monitoring, has provided the space for the number and specificity of these tailored public weather services to explode. However, in doing so, it seems that the consideration of how the public interpret forecasts and warnings and the benefits of tacit regional knowledge, which were so integral to the first explosion of public weather services in the 1960s, may have been forgotten. So quickly, just to summarise then. Tacit local, regional and personal knowledge have always been a key part of meteorological forecasts and warnings. However, their visibility, prominence and the importance designated to them to such non-numerical information by meteorologists has varied greatly throughout the 20th century and across the different media used to communicate forecasts. So in his ethnographic study of meteorologists' forecasting practice, Authors of the Storm, the sociologist Gary Fine goes behind the scenes of weather prediction in the US, introducing the meteorologists who create the forecasts to show how they intuitively factor key sociological elements into their predictions. By showing that the process of weather forecasting still incorporates subjective decision-making, Fine emphasizes the human fallibility in a process often viewed by outsiders as a purely objective pursuit. He argues that the lack of explicit training on the role of such intuitive elements in a meteorologist's formal education mean the importance of regional and tacit knowledge are not widely recognized by a discipline which encourages an image of being solely about numbers and objective prediction. Likewise, I believe that a greater recognition of the importance of such personal and regional information could also greatly benefit public weather services in the United Kingdom, especially those on the internet. Indeed, a starting point could be to more explicitly acknowledge the great amount of local, regional, historical and tacit knowledge that is already embodied in models, warning systems and their visualization and communication. By opening the black box of digital weather forecasts and warnings, I believe that end users will not only learn more about weather and their environment, but also that the inherent uncertainty within the discipline would become more widely understood and accepted. By increasing the amount and visibility of tacit knowledge in digital weather forecasts and warnings, not only may the accuracy of the service be improved, but also the public's understanding of the forecast may also greatly benefit. Thank you.